Have you ever been sitting across from the person who means everything to you and suddenly had one of those dangerous little ideas slip into your mind? Not the kind that wrecks lives. I mean the playful kind, the spark that flickers for half a second and then grows teeth. The kind that makes you bite back a grin because you already know trouble has entered the room. That is exactly how this story started. It began on a gray weekend afternoon with rain ticking against the windows, a blanket draped over our legs, a bowl of kettle corn between us, and my husband, Adrian, sprawled out on the sofa in the most shapeless sweatshirt ever made. He was relaxed, smug, and completely oblivious to the fact that his confidence was about to walk him straight into one of the most unforgettable afternoons of our marriage. At that point, Adrian and I had been together long enough to know each other's patterns by heart. We had 4 years of married life behind us. 4 years of shared grocery lists, sleepy Sunday mornings, arguments about where to store leftovers, private jokes no one else would understand, and those tiny daily routines that slowly turned two people into a single rhythm. We were not a dramatic couple. We were a laughing couple. We were the kind of people who could turn a pharmacy run into a comedy sketch. Somehow nonsense followed us around like a house pet, and on that rainy afternoon, it found us again. We were halfway through one of those makeover programs where someone ordinary disappears behind a salon chair and reemerges, looking like they belong on a magazine cover. I adore those shows. Always have. I love the reveal, the styling choices, the little gasp before the mirror turn. Adrian, meanwhile, was watching with the expression of a man trying very hard to remain unimpressed. He tossed a few pieces of popcorn into his mouth and pointed at the television. "I still don't understand why people act like this is some huge transformation," he said. "It's clothes, hair, a little makeup. That's it." I turned my head and stared at him in slow motion because once he said that, I could actually hear the universe hand me an opportunity. "Just clothes, hair, and a little makeup?" I repeated. He glanced at me, then back at the screen, then back at me again with a trace less certainty than before. "Well, yeah. I mean, it's not wizardry." The smile I gave him should have warned him. It was the smile of a woman who had just been gifted a perfect bad idea. "Would you care to test that theory?" I asked. Now, here is what you need to know about Adrian. He is generous, hilarious, dependable, thoughtful, and almost criminally easy to dare into things. That man cannot leave a challenge alone. He once entered a chili eating contest at a neighborhood festival because someone at the next table said, "You probably couldn't handle the last round." He absolutely could not handle the last round. He spent 45 minutes leaning against our kitchen counter with tears in his eyes, whispering that his soul had left his body. And still, he never learns. So when I offered him a challenge, I could practically watch the trap click shut. "What kind of test?" he asked, narrowing his eyes. "I give you a full makeover," I said. "Everything. Skin care, makeup, hair, wardrobe, all of it. If you still look basically the same when I'm done, I will admit you were right." His eyebrows lifted. Out loud. Very out loud. "And if I don't, then you admit that what you just dismissed actually takes skill, vision, technique, and a lot more thought than you've been giving it credit for." He leaned back, considering. I could tell the promise of hearing me declare his victory was working on him. He loved being right. Not in an obnoxious way. In a deeply delighted way. The man collected correct opinions like souvenirs. Finally he said, "Fine. But I want it known that I am accepting under protest." "Documented," I said, already reaching for my phone to start planning. I thought it would be funny. It was funny. What I did not expect was that it would also become one of the most unexpectedly meaningful experiences we had ever shared. And that is saying something because we once assembled a 12-drawer dresser together with only one missing screw and no divorce papers filed. The truth is, beneath the teasing and the bet, something else was waiting for us that day. Something gentler. Something more revealing than either of us saw coming. What started as a joke turned into one of those strange, beautiful moments where laughter opens a door and suddenly you find yourself standing in a deeper conversation than you planned on having. So let me walk you into it properly. By the next morning, I had transformed our bedroom into what I dramatically titled Project Velvet Switch. Yes, I gave it a name. Yes, I made a list. Yes, I took the list seriously. I woke up buzzing with the kind of energy most people reserve for vacation mornings or massive clearance sales. Adrian woke up looking like a man wondering whether there was still a legal route to backing out. At breakfast, he stared into his coffee mug like it might offer rescue. We could still pretend none of this happened, he said. People move on from verbal agreements all the time. You shook on it, I reminded him, sliding a plate of toast and eggs in front of him. He held up his hand and looked at it with betrayal. This hand has ruined my life. I laughed so hard I nearly inhaled orange juice. Before I go any further, I want to be clear about something. Adrian was never vain. Not even a little. This was a man who had to be reminded on our wedding day to stop fiddling with one cuff and check whether his collar was folded wrong. In his mind, dressing up usually meant putting on the clean sneakers instead of the old ones. He was not someone who spent time thinking about palettes or silhouettes or texture or finish. That entire world existed outside his usual field of vision. But he did have one trait I adored more than almost anything else. When he decided to show up, he really showed up. He might hesitate. He might joke. He might complain theatrically for effect. But once he crossed the threshold into an experience, he gave it his full attention. That curiosity was one of the reasons I fell in love with him in the first place. The night before, I had arranged everything on our bed and vanity with almost ceremonial care. Brushes sorted by size. Products lined up in order. An outfit chosen with real intention. Not a costume. Not something mocking, but something flattering and elegant. A soft knit top, fitted trousers, delicate accessories, and a pair of sensible ankle-strap block heels that were merciful by heel standards. I had also borrowed a gorgeous shoulder-length wig from my friend Marisol, who does local theater and owns enough wigs to stock a small studio. When Adrian stepped into the room and saw the setup, he stopped in the doorway. "Why is there hair on a mannequin head?" he asked. "That," I said, "is not hair on a mannequin head. That is possibility. It's judging me. It's waiting for you." He exhaled slowly, then walked over and sat in the chair I had placed in front of the mirror. He looked like a man reporting for a highly suspicious but unavoidable appointment. Still, there was something so endearing about the way he settled in, squared himself, and said, "All right, let's get this over with." I loved him so much in that moment I could have cried and laughed at the same time. I started with skincare because no transformation worth doing begins by skipping the canvas. I explained each step as I went. Cleanser, toner, serum, moisturizer, primer. He kept reacting in these little involuntary ways, tiny sounds of surprise every time something actually felt nice. "Okay," he said after the moisturizer sank in. "That part won't understand." "That feels excellent." "Exactly," I said. Caring for your skin is not some secret coded language. It's just caring for your skin. He gave a thoughtful little hum, and I saw the first crack in his assumptions right there. It was subtle, but it happened. That first moment where something filed under not for me suddenly moved into a different category entirely. Then I started the complexion work, and that was where I truly locked in. Matching products to Adrian's skin tone became its own satisfying challenge. He has rich golden brown skin with warm undertones, and I wanted everything to enhance what was already there instead of flattening it or fighting it. As I blended and adjusted and layered, I became completely absorbed. He caught me concentrating and said, "You look very serious." "I am working," I replied. "Please respect the artistic process." He pressed his lips together, obviously trying not to laugh. The contouring took time, mostly because his face already had remarkable structure. Strong jaw, great cheeks, symmetry I would have envied if I were a lesser person. "You have outrageously good bone structure," I told him, leaning in with a brush. He blinked. "I don't know what I meant to do with that statement." "You say thank you." "Thank you." "You're welcome. Now close your eyes." When I moved on to his eyes, something shifted. I used warm copper tones through the lids, deepened the outer corners with a muted berry shade, and softened the edges until everything glowed instead of shouted. When I stepped back for a second to look at the effect, I actually paused. Because it wasn't just that the makeup looked good. It was that he had gone very still. The joking had quieted. The commentary had faded. His face, usually so animated, looked thoughtful in a different way now. Open. Attentive. Almost vulnerable. It was as if he had stopped treating the experience as a gag and started experiencing it from the inside. The room grew hushed in that full-bodied way some silences do, not awkward, not empty, but dense with feeling. The kind of silence that tells you something real is happening, and no one has found language for it yet. That silence deepened when I fitted the wig. I adjusted the cap, settled the hair into place, arranged the soft waves around his face, and made a few final tweaks. All morning I had refused to let him look in the mirror. That was the one rule I enforced without compromise. No peeking. No half reveals. I wanted the full moment. Trust me, I said. I am deeply concerned that I already have, he muttered. Eyes closed. He obeyed. I finished the lip color, touched the highlight one last time, and stepped back. Okay, I said softly. Now look. He opened his eyes. Then he saw himself. He said nothing for several seconds. Not a joke. Not a laugh. Not even an ironic comment to ease the tension. He just looked. And then, very quietly, he said, "Wow." That was it. One word. But it landed with the weight of a whole paragraph. I watched him in the mirror as he studied his own face. Not glancing. Not checking.
Studying.
Really seeing himself. Most of us don't do that often. We monitor ourselves in passing. We correct, judge, assess, and move on. But we rarely pause long enough to really look. He looked beautiful. That is not me being sentimental or trying to flatter him for the sake of the story. It was simply true. The warm tones pulled light into his skin. The eye makeup gave his gaze depth and drama. The shaping softened and defined his features at the same time. The hair framed him so naturally it was almost startling. He was familiar and transformed all at once, recognizable and new in the same breath. "That's me," he said, still staring. "Yes," I said. He swallowed. I look different." "You look stunning," I told him. He didn't dismiss it. He didn't wave it away. He just kept watching his own reflection with an expression that was part awe, part confusion, part discovery. After a while he said, "I never realized how much thought goes into all of this." "The application?" I asked.
No.
"The whole design of it." He pointed carefully like he didn't want to smudge anything. "You chose colors based on my skin. You changed the shape of things without making them look fake. You knew what would balance what. That's not random. That's craft." There it was. Not the external reveal. The internal one. The understanding. Gently, I said, "You didn't know because you'd never looked closely." He gave a small, embarrassed laugh. "That's a very kind way of saying I was confidently ignorant." "Only a little." He turned away from the mirror then and looked at me directly, and what hit me in that moment was not pride that I had proved a point. It was tenderness. He wasn't just acknowledging the skill.
He was acknowledging me.
"Thank you for not making me feel ridiculous," he said. The whole bet fell away right there. The couch, the popcorn, the smug remark, all of it dissolved. What remained was simply two people who loved each other, standing in the middle of a moment neither of them expected to matter this much. I squeezed his hand and smiled. "Now," I said, "because I am physically incapable of leaving a serious moment untouched for too long. Do you want to attempt the shoes, or should we end the miracles while we're ahead?" His eyes dropped to the heels waiting nearby.
He looked at them.
Then at me. "One supernatural event at a time," he said. That was fair. Watching someone you love attempt something completely outside their comfort zone is one of the most tenderly hilarious things in the world. Adrian approached those shoes like a man preparing to cross a ravine using borrowed engineering. "These are the beginner pair?" he asked. "These are the most forgiving heels I own." He picked one up and examined it like evidence. "How high?" 2 inches. He looked scandalized. "And your normal pairs?" I pointed toward a taller set near the closet. He stared. "You move around in those voluntarily?" "Happily." He shook his head with solemn respect. Incredible. Disturbing, but incredible. The first time he stood up in them, he froze immediately. Not because he almost fell, because his entire body had just received brand new information. Everything moved, he announced. Yes, I said, trying not to laugh too hard. That would be your center of gravity. My spine made a decision, without consulting me. That also sounds right. He took one careful step, then another. His arms rose instinctively, just slightly, as his body worked out balance in real time. He crossed the room with the concentration of someone carrying a tray of crystal glasses across black ice. When he reached the wall, he touched it with one hand, turned, and looked back at me with surprised triumph. I can do this, he said. You absolutely can. For the next hour, he practiced. Slowly at first. Heel, step, shift. Heel, step, shift. But somewhere in the middle of it, something began to loosen. Not in a performative way. Not in a stereotype. Something subtler than that. He became more aware of himself. More deliberate. More present. At one point, he stopped midway across the room and said, "You have to think about every movement." I nodded. That's part of it. I usually just move without noticing. This makes you feel every adjustment. That's one reason I like it, I said. It puts you inside your body. He looked at me with genuine curiosity. You really think about presentation this deeply, don't you? All the time. He turned carefully, managing it much better now. People dismiss style as shallow. They do, I said. And they're wrong. It's one of the most immediate ways people express themselves. Before you say a word, you've already communicated something. He considered that while walking another slow line across the room. Then he asked, "What am I communicating right now?" I looked at him. Full face done. Hair in place. Posture adjusting. Determination in every careful step. Courage, I said. He was quiet for a second. Then he nodded once. I can live with that. And because he could only let sincerity linger so long before poking it with a stick, he added, I still feel entitled to a certificate on your behalf. If this is a daily activity, there should be accreditation. I agree, I said. Possibly a medal. The interesting thing about real transformation is that it never stays confined to one person. I had started the day thinking this would be a creative experiment and a fun story. But somewhere between the mirror reveal and the fourth lap across the room in block heels, I realized something in me was shifting too. Watching Adrian enter a world that was unfamiliar to him with such humility touched something in me. He wasn't just tolerating the experience to prove a point. He was engaging with it, asking questions, revising his assumptions in real time, letting himself be new at something, letting himself not know. That kind of bravery doesn't get enough credit. Not loud bravery. Not flashy bravery. Quiet bravery. The kind that sits in a chair and allows itself to be changed. The kind that risks discomfort in order to understand another person better. At one point he paused and asked, "Can I ask you something?" Of course. When you get ready for something that matters, what does it feel like while you're doing it? Not after people see you. While you're in it. I thought about it carefully. It feels like care, I said. Like I'm giving myself time and attention on purpose. Like I'm reminding myself I'm worth effort before the world gets any part of me. He absorbed that. I think I always misunderstood it, he said after a moment. From the outside, it can look like it's only about being looked at. But from in here, he gestured vaguely to himself, the makeup, the shoes, the whole experience. From in here, it feels more like intention. Yes, I said quietly. He searched for the right word. Like practice. Practice in deciding how you want to arrive in your own life. I stared at him. Adrian, I said, that may be one of the smartest things anyone has ever said to me about beauty. He laughed, a little embarrassed. I don't think I would have gotten there without doing it. Thinking about something is not the same as putting it on your body and feeling how it changes the way you move. That was him all over. Clear-eyed enough to update his worldview when new experience demanded it. No ego defense. No clinging to a bad take just to save face. So naturally, I smiled and said, "For the record, you were wrong." He didn't even resist. I was completely wrong. How does that feel? Surprisingly peaceful, he said. Also humbling. Also, your morning routine deserves much more respect than I've been giving it. I pantomimed writing this down in invisible legal documents. The rest of the afternoon unfolded in that same beautiful rhythm, half laughter, half real conversation. As I touched up details and helped him get more comfortable, he started asking about everything. Where contouring came from, how color theory applies to makeup, why certain shapes create different visual effects, what makes something elegant versus trendy. The questions kept coming, and the more he asked, the more I found myself thinking about how many invisible rules people live by without ever challenging them. So much of adulthood is built on inherited assumptions. What is for us? What isn't? What makes sense? What's normal? What belongs on our side of some imaginary line? And how much joy, artistry, understanding, and self-knowledge get lost because we never test those lines. Of course, we took photos. There was never any universe in which I was going to do all that work and not document it. I have loved visual storytelling for as long as I can remember. Even as a kid, I could flip through old-fashioned editorials and feel something electric happen in my chest. Composition matters to me. Mood matters. Light matters. And here I had my husband looking luminous in my bedroom like the lead in an indie film poster. The camera was coming out. That was inevitable. Predictably, Adrian had concerns. "I don't know how to pose," he said, standing in front of the plain wall I had chosen for the backdrop with all the grace of a very elegant traffic sign. "Nobody knows how to pose until they learn," I said, adjusting the ring light. "My hands are behaving like strangers. Give them a task." "A task."
Yes.
"Rest one at your waist. Touch your collarbone. Hold a sleeve." Hands only look awkward when they have no purpose. He tried the collarbone suggestion and looked at me for approval. I lifted the camera and nearly gasped. The light hit the high points of his face perfectly. The glow on his skin looked unreal. "Don't move," I said. I snapped the picture, lowered the camera, and showed him. The expression on his face, when he saw it, is one I wish I could frame. He looked startled first, then delighted, then almost shy, as if he had just met a version of himself he had not known was there. "That's actually a really good photo," he said. "That," I corrected, "is an exceptional photo. I'm not photogenic." That is a lie people tell themselves after seeing too many unflattering angles. He kept looking at the image. "I don't look like I expected." "You still look like you." He met my eyes. "Do I?" "Yes," I said. "That's why it works." We kept shooting. A few seated poses. A few standing ones. A candid laugh. A softer expression. As the minutes passed, the stiffness drained out of him. He stopped trying to copy poses and started finding small gestures that felt natural. And that was when the photos came alive. Not when he looked polished. When he looked present. Then, without warning, he said something so honest it stopped me. "I think I've always been a little uncomfortable being seen." I lowered the camera. "What do you mean?" He thought for a moment before answering. "I think when I was younger, attention felt dangerous," he said. "Like if people really looked at you, they'd find something to criticize.
So I got used to minimizing.
Not drawing too much notice. Not taking up too much visual space." I set the camera down completely. "And today?" I asked. He looked across the room at his reflection in the wardrobe mirror. "Today feels like rehearsal," he said. "Like practicing being visible without apologizing for it. There are moments in a long relationship that feel like hidden rooms opening. You think you know the floor plan. Then one day a wall shifts, and there's a whole space inside the person you love that you had never fully seen before." That was one of those moments. I crossed the room, sat beside him, and said the only thing that felt true enough. "You deserve to be seen." He looked at me with those familiar eyes made suddenly dramatic by soft berry shadow, and he smiled in a way I will remember for the rest of my life. "Thank you for today," he said. "Thank you for saying yes." I very nearly didn't. "I know." He nodded. "I'm glad I did." When I think back on that day now, the funny parts still make me laugh. Him negotiating with the heels like they were labor conditions. Him staring suspiciously at the wig. Him demanding official recognition for anyone who can walk in stilettos without insurance paperwork. But the reason the memory stayed with me is not the comedy. It's what the comedy uncovered. By the end of that day, Adrian understood something he had never really understood before. Self-presentation was not frivolous. Care was not vanity. Beauty was not automatically performance for someone else. Sometimes it was ritual. Sometimes it was artistry. Sometimes it was simply a person deciding they were worth time, thought, tenderness, and intention. And for me, the gift was even deeper than being understood. I got to watch the man I love step into unfamiliar territory and let it change him a little. I got to watch him move from skepticism to respect, from teasing to insight, from distance to empathy. I got to see him encounter another way of being in the world and not mock it, not defend himself against it, but listen to it. That kind of openness is rare. That kind of openness is intimacy. And maybe that is the real reason I still love telling this story. Not because I won the bet, although for the historical record, I absolutely did. Not because the photos were stunning, though they were. Not even because my husband looked incredible in a shoulder-length wave and a plum-toned eye. I love this story because a rainy weekend prank turned into a lesson in how love expands. How sometimes the people closest to us understand us better not through grand speeches, but through trying on one small piece of our world and realizing it carries more meaning than they ever imagined. What started as a joke ended as recognition. And honestly, that was a much better prize than being right.